Today I am going to bench bleed a brake master cylinder. And this is a process that is really worth doing correctly if you have to replace the master cylinder on a vehicle, because if you do this, you may be able to avoid having to individually bleed all the brakes, because this is a way of keeping air from being introduced into the system when you remove the master cylinder. So just to get our bearings here, here's the reservoir for the master cylinder. This is where you pour the brake fluid into the top here. This would be, and the way I have this in the vise here, the front of the vehicle would be over on this side, and over on this side of the master cylinder is actually the engine firewall and the power brake booster, which is a large round object that attaches on this side of the master cylinder. And there is a piston in the brake power booster which goes in here and forces the fluid from the master cylinder out through the system. We have our two brake lines that connect here like this into our fittings, and the other one here. And the reason I have the two of them instead of one is for safety's sake. The front and the rear braking system of the vehicle are fed independently. In case there's a catastrophic failure in one part of the system, you will still have brakes either front or rear. So you're going to need something to mount the vise in so that you can keep it good and steady. Obviously a bench vise is the preferred device for that. And I'm just going to swing this around a little bit, because as I do the video we're going to kind of move around a little bit here, because I'm going to want to show you this portion here, which is the piston which we are going to force into the master cylinder as we bleed it. To do this procedure, the way I'm going to do it, you are going to want to have two short pieces of brake line with the fittings on the end of them that will fit into your master cylinder. Now, if you don't have them, it might be worth spending a few dollars. Go down to your auto parts store and get one line and just cut it in half with a fitting on each end, and one will go into each one of the fittings in your master cylinder. You are going to want to have a pair of gloves, not like these. I use these over a pair of non-porous gloves, because brake fluid can be kind of nasty stuff. And what we're going to do is put a container with brake fluid underneath our lines here. So I like these little jars like this. You could put one big pan, but I find that wastes a lot of brake fluid. So a little container like that, and you're going to want a container of brake fluid, obviously, and something to pump the piston into the master cylinder with, preferably a dowel or a piece of wood, something like that. Once you have the master cylinder secured in the bench vise and your two brake lines coming out and curved under your container so that the brake line is pointing down like this, you can see I've kind of got this built up. I got a piece of 6x6 there, and you want to build these up so that the containers are down below those brake lines. Then you're going to pour the brake fluid into the container until the bottom of the line is underneath the brake fluid. And after you do that, you are going to fill the master cylinder. So, at this point, we have our two containers with the brake fluid above the line where it goes in. You're going to have lots of brake fluid handy because I've already topped this up as the fluid goes down through the master cylinder. So I have added to this since we put the brake fluid in the master cylinder the first time. Now I haven't actually pumped this piston here since we put fluid in because I'm hoping that you'll be able to see what happens as I pump this. So you should see air bubbles coming out in those little containers. So I'm just going to have to hold this master cylinder a bit because it's a little loose in my vise there. Now if you watch those containers, I'm not going to get too aggressive with that piston. I'm going to push it in, but you can see the air coming out. Now I'm going to continue to fill up the master cylinder here, and as I say, this is why you want to have lots of brake fluid handy. And just I'm going to keep pumping that in, release, pump that cylinder again, hold it for a second, let the air get out, and I release that, pump the cylinder again. You see all that air coming out of there. Now as I said, you might go through a fair bit of brake fluid doing this, but you're going to save yourself a lot of work if you don't have to bleed each brake individually when you're done. And even if you do end up having to bleed the brakes at the bleeder screws at each individual wheel, it will be a lot less that you would have to do. So I keep topping that up, push the piston in, release, and I keep pumping that now. You can see the fluid coming out as the level of brake fluid in the jar goes up there. And I'm watching around the lines here. I don't see fluid coming out of those lines, and I've only put those hand tight, those two fittings. But I just want to make sure I didn't see any air bubbling around it. Oops. I think I hit my camera. Anyway, keep pumping the air out. And as I pump that piston in, and then I release it, what we're going to start to see is that the level in that jar is increasing with the brake fluid, but there won't be any more air bubbles. I'll top that up again. We see lots of fluid coming out in the jar. We're almost there now, so we basically just keep pumping that piston, adding the brake fluid until there's no more air bubbles there. So I've done the procedure a few more times, keeping on pumping the piston, and hopefully you'll be able to see as I push this piece of wood in. I wish I had a better piece of wood, but I don't. You can see the level in the jar going up. Then as I release the pressure on the piston, the level in the jar goes down a bit, but it's sucking fluid out back into the line now. So as I release the pressure, the fluid comes back in the line, but there's no air. So if I pump out, put the pressure on the piston, pump the piston into the master cylinder, you can see the level of the fluid going up in the jars. I release the pressure, it's sucking fluid back in, and there's no more air coming out. So it is now bled. So at this point, the master cylinder has been bled, I got my little bottles or containers of the way. I'm going to top it up here. I'm going to put the reservoir cap back on, and I'm going to remove my two little brake lines and take this over and install it on the vehicle. It should be just a matter of getting it in place on the power brake booster on this end and connecting my two brake lines on here. So this is going to drip a bit, but as I say, it has been bled, so as long as I don't take too much time getting it onto the vehicle, it'll be fine. And I'm actually going to take my bottle of brake fluid with me, and if I see that the level of the master cylinder goes down too much, I'm going to I'll just top it off.